Hi, welcome to my channel, Seaside Snuggles, Quilts, Patterns, and Crafts, where I focus mainly on quilts, but will craft anything that tickles my fancy. My name is Sheila, and today we're going to finish the Hugs and Kisses quilt. So we've already done the hug part, which are the O's. We've done the heart part, and now we're going to finish the X and assemble the whole quilt. So those other videos are standalones if you're only interested in those blocks. Each of those blocks finishes 8 inches square. This is going to finish 4.5 by 8, oh sorry, finish 4 inches by 8 inches rectangular to make our columns. We're going to put this quilt together in columns and then we'll sew the columns together. And I'll show you how to get everything lined up so you get these seamless transitions in your X's. I hope you'll join me. I don't think anything else needs to be said, so let's get started. Okay, so now we're to the last block that we're going to add into our Hugs and Kisses quilt, and this is the center of the X, which is the kiss. This time I'm going to use my larger measurements so that you can see how to cut your larger blocks down if you need to. These flying geese are the same size as the flying geese at the top of the heart, so you'll get to see the difference in the making and getting the same result. So for this one, the size that's in the pattern is going to be 5 1/4, 3 inches, 4.5. Okay, for these extended ones, so that we can cut it down and get nice rectangular blocks, I'm going to use 5 3/4, 3 1/4, and this is still going to be 4.5. Okay, so these are flying geese. They're going to be put together the same way as we've been putting them together. I'm starting with 2 triangles that are, the larger triangle is the background fabric, and the larger square is background fabric, and the smaller squares and center are our X fabrics. So I'm going to just make sure this top one is on top of the bottom one. I have a little bit hanging off the edge, which is not typically what you would do, but because we've extended the size a little bit, that's how I'm going to do it. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch away from the line on either side. So join me at the sewing machine. We're going to cut this on the diagonal between the 2 stitch lines. And these I'm just going to press toward the smaller triangles. Now we're going to put our second squares on, and these flying geese are going to be enough to make 2 center X squares. So we're just going to do one. I'm going to sew both of them right now though. Let's do that. All right, let's cut these apart, cut them between the stitch lines. And the second side I'm also going to press just towards the smaller triangle. And these are oversized, but you're going to position your ruler the exact same way to get the end result of a 2.5 by 4.5 inch flying goose block. So first I'm going to do it the just normal way, using a regular old ruler. And half of 4.5 is 2 1/4, so I want to put my 2 1/4 line at the tip of my flying goose, and then I want to make sure that I've got the edge of the triangle at 2 1/2 on both sides. Okay. After I get everything lined up, you can see that I've got plenty. This is like 2 3/4. I've got plenty all the way around to get this wherever I want it. If you find that you are cutting off the tips of your flying geese, just scoot your ruler up about between the 1/8 inch mark, so about a 1/16 of an inch. Make sure that you're keeping the bottom on 2 1/2 inches, and then square that up. For your second cut, it's just 2 1/2 by 4.5. So 2 1/2 by 4.5. You see I've got like a 1/4 of an inch extra around there. You also have your 45-degree line that's on your flying goose unit. Once you have it upside down, so that you know that you have a nice block. Okay, so this is what you get when you have enough fabric to cut it down. We'll do that again. Half of 4.5 is 2 1/4. Let's make sure I'm all the way on the mat. I'm going to put my 2 1/4 there, and I'm going to slide it up just a little bit to conserve my point. Here, my 2 1/2, I want to rotate the ruler so that my 2 1/2 is on the edge of the triangle, maintaining my position with the 2 1/4 spot here. And then I want to make sure that I'm at 2 1/2 here, and then I'm ready to cut. Rotate my block. Now I'm just putting it at 2 1/2 and 4.5. 2 1/2, 4.5. My 45-degree line looks pretty good on my flying geese unit. I'm going to cut this extra 1/4 of an inch off. So you have a little bit more waste, of course, with your fabric, but you have nice blocks to put together at the end. Now using my template, these are both pressed outward, so I want to use the part of my template that I made that shows the 1/4 of an inch. That means that the pieces of tape are inside, and this time I can just slide my template up on there, lock it into the triangle, and cut the 3 sides. Then I can get my 2 1/2 inches as well, because I can still use the ruler like a regular ruler, right? So I'm just measuring 2 1/2 inches here, cutting that off. So there's that one. Do the same thing. I'm just going to use my template here, and I'm going to lock it in, and I'm going to cut around the outside. It's not even a whole lot of thinking to it. And then this time I'm going to use my 2 1/2 mark here, rotated my cut side. There's my 2 1/2. I'm going to use this to make sure that I am perpendicular, and then bam. All right, so that's all of my flying geese blocks squared up in a couple different ways. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put one on each side of this square. And these I'll save for the next one. Let's go sew this. Now these seam allowances are going to be pressed towards the center. And that is the center of your X block. So the next thing we'll be doing is we'll be constructing our columns, because this quilt is put together in columns, and then the columns will be sewn together to complete your quilt. So see you for that. So you have all of your blocks made, and now it's time to lay these out. And I want to show you how it's laid out by column. So I know you can only see a small part, but you have your O block, you have a heart block, and you have the center of your X blocks. And you're going to alternate between a heart upside down, an O, a heart right side up, and the center of your X. And you're going to repeat that on all of your rows, but your rows are going to be staggered so that the center of your X on one row lines up with the center of your O on the next row. So if you're going across, it's going to be XO, XO, and then your hearts are going to be lined up across this center band, and they're going to be upside down, right side up, upside down, right side up. Okay, so if you're doing a scrappy quilt, even though we're only doing two colors here so you can really see the pattern, if you're doing a scrappy quilt, that's what you need to remember. Upside down, right side up, upside down, right side up is going to be alternating. When you put these blocks together, you need to put a heart, the X, and the heart together on each column. That way you can take the whole stack to your sewing machine and sew those pieces together, then put your O's in on alternating columns. And then once you have those columns done, they're going to end like this. You're not going to have an even part, and you'll need to decide which way you want to finish your top and bottom of this part of the quilt. So we'll talk about that in a moment. So we've taken all of our hearts and X centers off the board that have our all three pieces go together. My mouth is I don't know, in full rebellion right now. And the way these three pieces are going to go together are just the way we took them off the board. You're going to have the X piece in the middle, and then your two hearts of your two different colors off to the sides with the bottoms pointing towards the X piece. So I already have one of these on the sewing machine because I kept breaking my thread yesterday. But what I wanted to revisit is that your seam allowances should be both towards the bottom of the heart, and you want to make sure that you squared up your blocks, because I did not square up my blocks. They should measure 8.5 by 8.5. So before you sew these together, just make sure that they are of the right dimensions. That'll give you a better result. All right, that's pretty good. And then when we put these together, you can have the heart on top or the X block on top, but you want to sew it together this way. I would suggest sewing it together with the heart on top so that, man, why does that look so much wider than 8.5? Let me double check one more time. Yeah, I think this one's just maybe smaller than 8.5. Yeah, this one's a little bit smaller. So we just want to make sure these are centered on the point of the heart, which you can see right there. And if it's not perfectly sized, we could give it a little fold here and mark the center of the X. Put the center of your heart aligned with the center of the X. I'm just going to stick a little pin in there. And then you want to make sure that the edge is lined up as best you can. Let's see, scooch this down a little bit more. And when you sew this, you want your stitch line to pass below the point of your heart. Because we've pressed our seam allowances towards the heart, you shouldn't have a bunch of bulk there where the needle passes through. Okay, so we're going to sew this together. And then we're going to put the darker hearts on the other side. So there's that one, and there's that one. And then this one's going to go on top of here. And we have another dark heart here that I can set up. So this one looks like I have a little bit too much space at the bottom. So this is another one I need to check and make sure it's 8.5 by 8.5. Okay, and it is a little bit long there on the bottom. So let me get that squared up. Let's make sure that my heart is actually centered. There we go. I should have at least 1/4 inch off the bottom there. So we'll get this squared up. I have a little piece here on the side that needs to be trimmed. And get that right there. That again. Okay. Get this rotated. 8.5 by 8.5, and now we are in. Let's check this heart. This one looks like I did square that one up. And I also need one of these light colored hearts because I have this sewn together already. So let me get actually I have a couple of those sewn together already. So let's check this one. I should have squared these up before I put them on the board, but I didn't. So here's 2 of the light hearts with X pieces already on them. Here is this one I sewed to the wrong side. This edge should be against the X. So I'm going to set that aside because I need to rip it. But this one can get this piece. So I'm just going to piece these together. Again, I almost did it upside down. Remember, the bottoms of the heart should be towards the X block, the X center. So that one I'm just going to lay on top like that because that looks ready. Put that over on the machine. This dark one, I'm just going to finger press this toward the X. And then this piece, the bottom's going to go here. And I'm just going to put a pin right here just to keep it together. And we need another dark heart that's going to go on this one. Finger press toward the X. Bottom of the heart. That one's ready to go. Let's see if I can prep any other ones. So I'll separate the light parts and sew these dark parts. We'll get their first part of the X. And I just want to make sure it's centered. And there we go. It's another X center. And once I get these all prepped, I can pretty much just chain piece. And as long as I do all the dark ones, then I know that I have done half, right? Or all the light ones. Either one, just do all, unless you're putting on the second side. So I'm starting with the dark side for all of them. And pin that. Let's pin it this way. All right, so I have these prepped, and one on the sewing machine that I have not pinned. Let me go ahead and pin that one. And I'm just putting a single pin in. All right, so I'm going to start by sewing these that only are 2 pieces so that I can add the third piece on in my cycle, and then I'll add the third pieces on to the pieces that I have. And this one I'm just going to sit down and rip, and then I'll get that sewn together. First pairs. So those are my triplets. Here's my pairs. And they should all get a light heart. And I'm going to pull my pins out. And I'm going to finger press towards the X center. And the reason you want to do that is when you put your columns together, you're going to have the O's on either side. The O's are pressed to the outside, so this section will nest with the section beside it on each side. And that will help you to keep things aligned so that your X's look nice and crisp. Okay, just a little finger press. Then we're going to take our lighter hearts, whether they are scrappy or all the same, and we're going to put those on the other side. So you'll still have some heart blocks on the board. The ones that don't have a third partner will still need to be sewn together. So after we get these all put together, I'm going to put them back up on the board, and then we will grab all the pieces that are just one heart and an X, and we will sew those together. Ooh, this looks really wavy, and my seam allowances are not all pressed in the right direction, so I'm going to make a couple of corrections in the next step, but for this step, I just want to get that little hump out at the top. It's right there. And I can see that my edges aren't straight, so I'll need to compensate for that in the piecing. But I do want to center it up as best I can. And then things will, they'll come together. Ooh, that is very close to the edge. Almost put that on upside down. I need to press the seam allowance towards the bottom, and then I need to maybe reinforce this stitch line a little bit. It was very close. I was experimenting with some different sizes to see if I could maybe adjust the cuts so that you'd have more success with your flying geese, and I came to the conclusion that the best measurements are the ones that are the standard measurements for making the flying geese 4 at a time. You just need to, man, that is not square. Let me iron this one really quick. You do need to make sure that you're cutting straight. I mean, that you're sewing straight and cutting straight. My problem is in the sewing. I try to sew fast, and then my lines are wobbly, and I end up with not the greatest results sometimes. And instead of correcting that as I should, I just have found ways to work around it in the next step so I don't have to go back. But if I would practice the skill of sewing better straight lines, then I wouldn't have so much difficulty in getting things aligned at the end. But they do align in the end. So, all right. That one still seems, it's just curved. It's just weird. So let's pin this, and we'll sew these. And actually, I can go ahead and sew, even though I need to rip the seam on this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put like a couple pins in here, an X to remind me to take that off. But I'm going to go ahead and put this pink heart on while I'm working. Okay. All right. These are going to be pressed towards the center, so I have that up. And I'm going to give it a spritz of water. I'm going to finger press this side towards the center. This toward the center. And then I'm just going to press those centers first. Then I'm going to flip it over, and both of these need to be corrected. So So I'm going to press those towards the center. So your horizontal seams across your heart should go towards the bottom of the heart. And it's still very damp, but now I've got it pretty much in the right direction so that I can get it to lay down from the front. And now is when I'm going to give it a good press. Make sure that the seam is opened up. And I'm going to press it till it's just about dry. This is really weird right here. I should probably re-stitch that, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to. It'll work out. All right, so that's the way the 3-part section should look. I'm going to iron all of these, and then I will be back with my 2-part heart and X sections. Voiceover Sheila here. Sorry about that. I lost the sound. I decided not to show you the 2-piece parts because it wasn't really necessary. It's exactly like these 3-piece parts, and I have all of them sewn together, and we're going to add the O's now. So because these are the same, all of the 3-piece parts are a light heart, an X, and a dark heart. You want to make sure that you put your O between a dark heart and a light heart. When you do that, you want to make sure that these seam allowances that are pressed away from center on the O are parallel to the rectangles on the hearts. So see how those seams are pressed away from the center there? Those need to be parallel with the rectangle seams on the hearts. When you put these together, I'm going to use a 2-pin method. You don't have to do that. If you want to use the hope and sew method, if your blocks are accurate, you should have pretty good success. But if you find that you're not having good success, you might want to give this method a try. So I'm going to sew the O onto the darker heart first, and I'll put that lighter heart just aside for now. So the edge that you're sewing, your stitch line, needs to be parallel to those seam allowances that are pressed outward from the O. Now I'm taking that first pin and I'm going to place it in that little bend there where the diagonal line for my half square triangle meets the rectangle that's at the top of the O. I have a little bend there. I want to stick my pin right in at that bend in the single piece of fabric, and then on the heart as well, I want to stick it right at the tip of that heart in a single piece of fabric. Okay? So I'm just going to stick this straight through. I'm not like pinning it. I'm just having it straight through to line up those points. Then I want to make sure that my sides are aligned, especially the corner closest to where I'm pinning. After I have that pinned, I'm pinching it really tight with my fingers, and now I'm going to pin across where that first pin is, trying to get it in the seam allowance, and just taking as small a bite as possible. I know there's a lot of fabric there, but if you take as small a bite as possible, it will be helpful. So that's the joint that I put it through on the O, and that's where I put it on the heart. Both layers are through one layer of fabric. Both blocks are only through one layer of fabric. Make sure that you remove your vertical pin, and then we'll use it on the other side. So same thing, we're going to put it through that little bend joint there in a single piece of fabric, and then we're going to put it through the single piece of fabric at the top of the heart. It doesn't matter if you have the heart on top or the O on top. You just want to be accurate with getting it in those intersections. Make sure you line up your edges before you pin across, and make sure that you remove that pin, because I oftentimes leave 2 pins in that thing. So make sure that you remove that pin. So this is ready to go. Let's go sew it. So when we sew this, we want to get our edge aligned. And I'm going to approach the pin very slowly, and once I get very close, I'm going to take that pin out, and I'm going to try to stitch right where the X is formed by my two stitch lines there. And I'm going to keep going. My seam allowance is open underneath, so I want to try to keep it open if I can. Then I'm going to approach this one slowly in the same place, which should be at the 1/4 inch. And it's bulky right there, so you may need to give it a little assist to get past there. And there we go. Okay, so let's give this a little spritz, and then I'm going to press the seam allowance towards the O. I'm just going to finger press it first. I want to check those intersections and make sure I have clean points there before I iron it with heat. And it looks pretty good, so we're going to go ahead and iron that down. So those two lines should come right to the points of your hearts, and now we're going to do the other side. So this time we're doing the light heart. Remember that we're going opposite the other color if you're doing a scrappy quilt, and you have it separated into light and dark fabrics, then make sure that you use a contrasting one. So same thing, we're going through the single layer of fabric at the heart point. This time we've got the heart on top, and then we're going through the single layer of fabric at that intersection on the O block. Straight down, we're going to line up our corner, make sure that the parallel and perpendicular edges are lined up as well. And I don't have a perfectly squared block here, so but I'm working it out. So pin across there. Remember to take a small bite, try to get it in that seam that's in the O, and then move to the next one. Same thing, single layer of fabric at the tip of the heart and at that little bend on the O block. Pull it through, line up your corner, and then pin across. And this one is ready to go. So we're going to go sew this one, and because we have the heart on this one, you can see what I was trying to keep open when I had the O on top. So again, I'm just going to sneak up on the pin, take the pin out before I stitch over it. I'm going to try to keep that seam allowance open in the center of the heart block. Creep up on the next pin, pull that one out, make sure my corner's lined up, and then I will finish up the stitch line. It's a little thick there, so it might need an assist. And now that's finished. So let's go iron. Again, I'm going to give it a little spritz of water, and I'm going to finger press toward the O. So whenever you're putting your O's in, you want to finger press toward the O's. Check your point, and then give it a little heat. So I'm going to continue with this. It's helpful to take a picture of your layout, especially if you have a design wall, so that you know where your O's go if you have two colors of O's. And then you can refer to that picture without going back to the design wall. So I'm just going to continue with that, referencing the picture that I have on my phone until I have my columns either all the way done or mostly done. So you'll see that I have some of the blocks not sewn into the columns, but let's go to the design wall and I'll show you why. All right, so finishing the tops and bottoms of your columns. You need to decide how you want to finish this off before you sew your columns together. So one way you can do this is to cut across the center of your X's and your O's, and that would give you a straight line across this part. And then you want to take the top of each column that you cut off and sew it to the bottom. So you take the half of this X, sew it to the bottom, the half of this O, sew it to the bottom, so on and so forth. Oh, also, when you put these together, the way that we've pressed the seam allowances in the O's are going to be away from center. The seam allowances in the X's are going to be towards the center, so they will nest. I know that I said to do your dark hearts towards the solid band and your light hearts towards the outside of your heart, but instead press all of your seam allowances towards the bottoms of your hearts. That way, if you're doing a scrappy quilt, you don't have to figure out which ones are light and dark necessarily. I mean, you should separate them just so that you have some contrast when you lay them out. But if all of them are towards the bottom, then they will all nest across this section. And then you don't have to do any kind of special thing, all right? So these will be sewn towards or away from center. These are towards the center. So this will nest. All of your hearts towards the bottom of the heart, then this will nest when you sew your columns together. So we talked about one way to do it, which is cut across your X's and O's. The other thing that you could do is you could cut across the center band of your hearts, and that will give you alternating colors across the top and the bottom of your hearts, and they will finish 3/4 of an inch, okay, at the top and the bottom. I think that might be how I do this quilt, just because I haven't done it that way before. And then I'll add maybe a striping effect to the left and right that will frame it in the pink color. What I have done on a different quilt, and I'll pop that up on the screen, is I added another bar. So I basically did not sew these hearts together across what would be the top, right? And then I added a bar to each section. So my 2 flying geese got a bar, and my large flying goose got a bar. And then I had those at the tops and the bottoms, which gave me the same effect as cutting across, but it took more fabric, and the bar was 2 inches instead of 3/4 of an inch. When you sew your columns together, you are going to need to match up these points at the bottom of your X's and at these intersections with your X's, and I'll show you that at the table. So now that we know how to put this all together, you see that I've sewn my hearts onto the X's first. Then once I have let's put these back up for a moment. And it's easy to see where to go. You're gonna alternate. It's gonna be X, heart, O, heart. X, heart, O, heart, okay? All right, so once you get all of these sewn together, they will look the same, right? And then you put them in their appropriate places, and then you can fill them with your heart blocks, with your O blocks. Make sure that you have the seam allowances that are out horizontal so that you can nest them across the columns. And then you can start sewing your O's between your sections and getting your columns all together. Whoop. So you see I have several columns to finish, but now that I've explained how to do this, I'm going to get these whipped up and put together. And I think the way that I'm going to finish I didn't turn that one upside down. The way that I'm going to finish my columns is I'm going to cut across the center of a row of hearts and then put those pieces at the bottom. My bottom row that you can't see right now is actually hearts. So I'm going to cut across the bottom of hearts, and then I'm going to put them at the top. And I will also, because of the number of repeats I have, need to shift over a column my cutoff pieces so that I can maintain the pattern of this column. So this column starts with this dark pink heart that I'm not sure you can see, and it ends with a dark pink heart. The next heart in this row would be a light pink heart. So I'm going to need to take from the next column for that light pink heart. And because I have an even number of hearts across my quilt, I have 6, I can just basically move each one over. So that's what I'm going to do. I will meet you at the sewing machine to show you where to match up your points as you're putting the columns together and where to match up the points as you're putting the final quilt together. So see you over there. Here I have a dark pink heart that I left off of a column. I'm measuring to make sure that I have a full 2 inches in that center rectangle, and I'm going to cut it at 1 inch from the seam. That's the way I'm going to divide all of the hearts that are at the top or bottom of each column. Here, I've already sewn the heart onto the column, but I'm going to do the exact same thing. I have already made sure that I had a full 2 inches, and now I'm cutting 1 inch from the seam to separate that top part of the heart. Now I'm going to take the bottom part of the heart that is the contrasting color, and I'm going to sew it onto the other side of the center X blocks, just like I did the full hearts. I'm just going to make sure that it's centered, pin it, and that one is ready to go to the sewing machine. Now I'm working with 2 columns. I also have the O's that I have not sewn onto other columns yet, and I'm going to sew the hearts that I just cut off to those O's. So it looks like, I think that I'm pinning them in the correct direction. So when I put these cut pieces of heart on, I want to put them on the same way I did the full hearts, making sure that those seam allowances that are pressed away from the center of the O are parallel to the seam line I'm about to sew. I'm also using the 2-pin method like I did before, making sure I get in a single layer of fabric at the tip of the heart point and through a single layer of fabric on the O. And this is just showing that I'm using the same dark color on a different color O based on my layout on the design wall. So it's not necessarily all dark O's with dark hearts. You have to check with your layout and make sure that you're sewing the correct colors to the correct hearts onto the correct O's. So I went back and forth several times before I decided to just take a picture, which is why I suggested taking a picture. So I'm going to get those sewn on. Excuse me, and just be careful. You want to make sure that you're sewing the top of the heart to an O and the bottom of the heart to an X. Other than that, it's just the same as if you were sewing full hearts on full O's or full hearts on full X's. The only other difference is that the way my layout is, the number of hearts that I have, heart rows that I have, is even, I think. So I have to use a different color heart. I have to swap colors from a different column to keep my column sequences consistent. Light, dark, light, dark. I hope that makes sense. But the size that you make your quilt will determine whether your heart, well, wherever you cut your columns, whether that be on O's or X's and X's or hearts, whether you can tray that directly to the top of the column or if you'll have to swap them around. So in this case, I had to swap them around. So you saw that I put dark tops on the light and the dark before. So these are the opposite ends of those columns, and I'm having to put light tops on one dark O and one light O. So it really does depend on your layout and how you want your O's to be arranged. You need to take a picture of that, and then you need to keep that in mind when you are making your column adjustments so that they line up correctly. Other than that, it's the same as what you've been doing before. Seems like I'm going in slow motion, huh? Maybe I should speed this up. Yeah, let's do that. That's a little better. So I'm actually working on opposite ends here. These two columns, one is going to be at the top of the quilt and one is going to be at the bottom of the quilt. That's why you're seeing the same colors there. And now I'm going to work on the opposite ends of the column, which again, one is the top and one is the bottom of the quilt. And again, they're going to be put together the same way. I'm using the 2-pin method, putting through a single layer of fabric on both the O block and the heart block at the top of the O and the tip of the hearts. These are going to be attached just as they were before, so I'm not going to show the sewing part. We're going to move right into sewing the columns to one another. So let's do that now. Okay, so this is my first pair of columns, and I'm going to start pinning this right hand side so I could get things lined up. You don't have to pin if you're confident with you being able to match up the seams without pinning, of course, but I do suggest pinning at least for the first set of columns so you can see what your results look like before you do something that makes you end up picking your seams. So this is my number 1 pair of columns, and I pinned it with these 2 seams nested, which is at the top of my hearts where they meet. So that pin can stay, but these are the crucial areas here. So I want to put a pin in right where my X has that little 1/4 inch seam allowance beyond the intersection. And I'm using the 2-pin method again. And then I'm going to put my pin in right here where that same intersection happens, but with the O. Straight down, these 2 seams should nest. I'm going to hold that pretty tight, and then I'm going to pin across it right in the seam where they nest. And then I'll take my vertical pin out. Nothing nests here. These don't nest, but this next section here is another crucial section at the bottom of where the X should make a straight line. So right where this intersection is with the background, and then right where the intersection is with the O, straight up and down, these seams nest. So the pin is really just holding it this way, and the nesting is lining it up this way. So when I stick my pin in, I'm going to stick it right through the stitches of this pin across my vertical pin, and then I can take the vertical pin out, and that should keep things aligned. The next section that's going to nest is right here, and this one you don't really have to pin, especially where the light heart is on top, because these seams will push together, but you just need to remember to get them in the proximity of one another. If you do want to pin, or if your 1/4 inch isn't consistent from the edge here, this part here, then you might want to pin. I'm going to go ahead and pin because this one looks much shorter than this one. So let's go ahead and do this correctly, or get this really lined up well. So I'm going to come into that Y intersection right there and pin down through the Y part here. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups. These seams will nest. So I'm gonna pin right through that seam. Same thing here on the bottom side of that 2-inch section of the hearts, right through the Y and through the Y here. And you see my seam edges don't match in this case, so pinning it is going to give me a better result and get me in the right spot. My columns aren't super straight. If you're more careful with your seams than I am, you will have more success with having them exactly 8.5 inches. Mine are kind of all over the place, but they're close enough that any weirdness will be lost in the seam allowance. So my pinning is going to be crucial to keep everything lined up correctly. And when I pin, I'm not going through my seam allowance, this 3 or 4 layers of fabric. I'm going through a single layer of fabric that's at the intersection, which would be away from where the seam allowance is folded. Same thing on the other side. I'm going through the single layer of fabric, not all the folds or the layers. So straight up and down, I can feel that it's nested, and I'm going to pin across. And I'm just going to do this all the way down my column. If I have enough pins, I'll pin the next column as well, and then I'll sew them together. So I'll see you when I get all that done. Okay, so I only have the first rows done, and my pin is still marking that this is the first set of rows, but all the other pins are out as I sewed down because they were crossing my stitch line. I'm going to spritz down this whole thing with some water, and then we will take a look together at how it turned out. Then I'll go on and sew the other ones. So first thing I did was spritz it with some water. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pin out and I'm going to move it to the top right hand side of this pair of columns so that I still know this is my first set. And then I'm going to start finger pressing towards the right. And we can take a look at how these pieces came together. Let's move some of this stuff out of the way. So you can see how my intersections look. Okay. Oh, I didn't turn my iron on even. That's going to need a moment to heat up. But while it is heating up, so you can see this one's kind of far apart. I didn't get I didn't get all the way to the intersection there, so I might correct that. This one's okay. My line here is what the goal kind of is, to have a straight line for your X's. So that one's pretty good. This, I'll probably come back in and fix it actually while I'm waiting for this to heat up. I'm going to fix it right now. And when I look at that seam, I did wave out right there. See that? That's not 1/4 of an inch. So let me go get 1/4 of an inch seam right here. So I didn't pick or anything because my seams are going to be to the side. Let's see how it looks now. Better. All right. So that's another advantage to just pressing your seams to the side, is that if your correction is to make a thicker part of the seam, then you don't have to pick. I'm going to go ahead and get my extraneous threads as I approach them. All my seam allowances on the column are going to go to the right here. No particular reason. You could go back in and open them or press them to the left. Just whatever's comfortable for you. But you see how my X's are continuous and how the band across my hearts is straight. And I'm just going to check as I iron. If I need to make a correction, I'll make it as I go. And I'm feeling pretty good about how it looks. That one turned out really nice. And you're going to put all of your columns together the same way. Okay, and we're approaching the bottom. And it looks pretty good. This one is not perfect. I may go fix that real quick. I need to move in about 1/8 of an inch on my stitch line. And this one, not perfect either. So maybe starting here, I need to come in about 1/8 of an inch on my stitch line. So I'm going to do that. I'm just going to do that right now. Let's give this a little bit of press to make it sharp, make it flat again. I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to stitch 1/8 of an inch to the left to tighten up that seam. Let's turn this on. Give it another clap. Okay, so I'm going to start just right here. I start on the right hand side of my stitch line and then blend it out. And you can see where I waved in here. So starting there, I'm going to come to about 1/8 of an inch to the left of my existing stitch line. I'm not going to repin it or anything. And then I'm going to blend it back out. It's already back tacked, so I'm not worried about back tacking. Give it one more spritz and then we'll check it out. Finger pressed. Maybe a little, oh, it's okay. I was gonna say maybe a little bit too far here. It's a little bit, but this one turned out really good and this looks pretty good. I'm happy enough. And there we go. So that's my first pair of columns. And I will do the rest and then see at the design wall with this whole center of the quilt finished. I may not do any more than this quilt. I might just leave it as it is if it's a good throw size. But I'll see you when it's all done. All right, my friends, quilt's finished. We've done the hugs, the kisses, and the hearts. You, depending on how fast you quilt, should have time to finish this by Valentine's Day if you want to do a little lap quilt gift. It's actually almost a throw size. It finishes 48 inches wide by 71.5 inches. It would be 72, but if you split your hearts the way that I did at the top and bottom of your columns, then you'll lose a 1/2 inch. But other than that, it's a great size for a lap quilt, wheelchair quilt, lounge chair quilt. I hope you'll give it a try. Please post your pictures and tag me on Facebook, on Instagram. I would really love to see it. It always makes my day. If you enjoyed this, I will have the pattern in the description below as soon as it's available. It's not available quite yet. And I would love to get a like from you. A subscribe from you would be even better. And if you do subscribe, please select the notification bell so that you are notified when I post a new video. Since I don't do these on a regular schedule, I do them when I finish a project. I appreciate you joining me for this video. I love you guys so much. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.